Welcome to Strategies for Using the Target Language. These topics are going to cover level 0 to 1 beginner level students, but some of the concepts may be applicable to higher level students as well. In this session, we are going to discuss why and how to use the target language with beginners, and some strategies for getting the student to understand and produce the target language. Then we're going to talk about when it is appropriate to use English in the classroom. So let's get started. Well, why use the target language in class, even with beginners? We might think, well, they don't understand, but that's exactly what they're in class for. Students need a lot of input and exposure to the target language in order to learn that language. So you as the instructor get to prepare the material that they're going to be listening to and reading, and you're also, in most cases, you are the voice, you are the native speaker that they have the most exposure to. And so from level 0, the students are going to need to hear you speaking in the target language in order to understand the grammar structure, the pronunciation, etc. A lot of language learning is implicit and can come just from exposure. Now, of course, that's not all. The student needs to learn the grammar rules, the pronunciation, etc., and practice it. So not just being told this is how it is and saying, yes, I understand, even if they may not, but really, can the student communicate a message, even if it's not communicated perfectly in the foreign language? We want the focus to be on meaning, and do they communicate what they intend to? And this active engagement with students, this focus on learning by doing, is a really great way for students to learn and interact with the target language. And researchers such as Krashen and Vygotsky and others have all pointed toward these tips for using the target language. How much should we use the target language in class? If you said 90%, you are correct. And this amount of time includes teacher and student talking time. And yes, this is for beginner level students all the way up through advanced. But how is that even possible? There's definitely challenges to using 90% target language in the classroom. Well, we're going to talk about it. Some struggles that are common is that students may become frustrated if they don't hear English, or they may feel anxious for only hearing the target language. The student might look at you blankly or not understand, and that could be stressful as an instructor. And it can be time-consuming to figure out the best ways to use the target language in class with beginners. But we're going to talk about that in a little more detail coming up. So we are aiming to provide comprehensible input to the students. So comprehensible input is content that the student can understand. So we have the student's current level located here in blue, and we want to push and challenge them just beyond what they can do into that green space, into the I+1. So giving them confidence by allowing them to use the knowledge, the vocab, the grammar that they know, but then challenging or tweaking something about the task to just push them. And that's what's going to progressively increase the student's acquisition. Let's look at an example together. This is what's in a Cantonese textbook. This is a level 0 plus class, and we can see from looking at the vocabulary and some of the exercises that this is about hobbies. So now let's take a look at what this might look like in a classroom. So we're going to watch a video between an instructor and a student. And while we watch the video, please consider these 4 questions. What's the learning goal? How does the instructor show meaning? Does the student hear or see the phrase first? And what other helpful strategies do you notice?
Lei hao, Jessica.
你好，老師。
點啊？你好嗎？
幾好。嚟啦。
幾好，唔該。好，我哋今天會講得愛好，我哋鍾意同埋唔鍾意嘅愛好。好，我鍾意旅行。我鍾意旅行。旅行。
旅行。
你呢？你鍾意唔鍾意旅行？
鍾意，唔鍾意。OK。
你呢？我鍾意旅行。你鍾唔鍾意旅行？
No。
哦。
鍾意旅行。旅行。
旅行。
旅行。鍾意旅行。
你鍾意旅行。好。你鍾意做乜嘢？我鍾意讀書。
讀書。
我鍾意讀書。
讀書。
你呢？
鍾意讀書。
我鍾意讀書。
我鍾意讀書。
書。
書。
好。下一個。我鍾意睇電視。
睇電視。
係。好。你呢？你鍾唔鍾意睇電視？
我鍾意睇電視。睇電視啊。
好。你鍾意睇電視？哇，幾好食喎！我鍾意食飯。
食飯。
你鍾唔鍾意食飯？
食飯。
鍾意唔鍾意？
鍾意。你鍾意食飯？
你呢？你或者我？
你。
我
鍾意食飯。
好。我鍾意食飯。
我鍾意食飯。
Okay, so let's talk about that. The learning goal for this lesson was to talk about leisure activities, saying what you like and don't like to do in your free time. The instructor shows meaning to this beginner level student who doesn't understand everything that the teacher is saying by using pictures, gestures, and repetition. And these are strategies that you can employ with your beginner level students. Now, this is a more nuanced one. You may have noticed that the student heard the phrase before they saw the phrase. By having the student hear or listen to the phrase before seeing it visually, this creates a focus on listening rather than on reading. If the student were to see the phrase first, that would create more focus on pronunciation. So in this case, the value was for the student to focus on listening so the student heard the phrase first. And that can be a better strategy for overall building of one's listening capacity. Other helpful strategies you may have noticed could be focusing on meaning first. So even when the student made a few mistakes, like saying you when she meant me, or forgetting to use a pronoun entirely, that was okay. The teacher didn't really make any adjustments or corrections to that unless it created a hindrance in the message coming across. So the student was communicating even though it was not perfect all the time. Then these questions were very simple. Do you like this hobby? Do you like that hobby? And this engages the student. It also creates repetition. It doesn't change the sentence structure, but just changes some vocabulary words. You may have noticed that the instructor also allows for silence. This is especially important for beginner level students, but can be applied to all levels, actually. So as an instructor, we want to make sure things are going well and that the student is understanding, and we try to jump in a lot of the time, and we want to, see results and make sure that the student understands. But silence is processing time for the student. If they are silent, it does not mean that they do not understand. It could just mean that they are thinking. So one challenge as an instructor could be for you to just pause in silence, even a little bit longer, a few seconds longer than you normally do, just to allow the student to have a little more space to think through what was said or how to respond. Lastly, another helpful strategy this instructor employed is that they spoke slowly but naturally. So this can also be tricky when interacting with beginner level students. Sometimes we think that if I speak with less words, then the student will understand better. But the student is putting together the grammar structure of the target language. So an instructor that speaks slowly but naturally using proper grammar, pronunciation, phrases, etc., is actually very beneficial to a beginner level student's acquisition process. So to recap, here are some strategies for making yourself understood to a beginner level student while using the target language. For low levels, make sure to use visual support. This could be videos, pictures. There's a lot of resources online, and it's so helpful for a student to be able to both see and hear a new vocabulary word or a new concept. Even grammar could be illustrated using visual support. Then focus on meaning first. So not does the student pronounce and produce everything absolutely correctly with perfect grammar? No, but rather, can the student communicate with me in the target language and get their message across, even if it's imperfect? Being consistent in your wording with beginner level students is also a good strategy, because then the student can start to understand from context or from repetition what you are saying. Repetition is key for beginner level students. That is providing a lot of exposure and input to the target language. Some research indicates that students need a few dozen times of encountering a word before they are actually able to start using it and really understanding and remembering it. So repetition is very key. And then lastly, allow silence so that you provide processing time for the student and avoid interrupting their process as well. Now we're going to watch the second part of the video. And while we're watching this video, let's think about the following questions. How does the teacher provide support, or scaffolding is the professional term for that? Do the tasks get more difficult for the student? If so, how? how does the teacher provide variety and repetition? And who talks more in this video, the teacher or the student?
Zhong yi sick fan.
好，呢度有4個愛好，
Sega Naiho.
愛好 hobby。 呢個係乜嘢？
Oh. No Zhong yi 睇電視。
我鍾意睇電視。
睇電視。
好。你又鍾意做乜嘢啊？
食飯。
你最鍾意食飯？
我鍾意食飯。
好。呢個呢？
旅行。
旅行。
旅行。旅行。
Jessica， 你鍾唔鍾意旅行？
我鍾意旅行。
呢個呢？
讀書。
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 好。
我鍾意讀書。
讀書。
讀書。
好。好 ，Jessica， 你鍾意做乜嘢啊？
我鍾意旅行。我食飯。我鍾意食飯。我鍾意讀書。讀書。我鍾意睇電視。
好，你鍾意旅行，你鍾意食飯，你鍾意讀書，同埋睇電視。
睇電視。
幾好。
So let's talk about that Cantonese lesson. The teacher provided support or scaffolding in a couple of ways. One is through pictures. Again, that is such an important and helpful strategy with using the target language with beginners. Please definitely start using pictures with your beginners if you have not been doing that already. Another thing you may have noticed is that written support is also provided to the beginner student. So there was a sentence frame, a sentence starter so that the student could remember, okay, this is how I start the sentence. This is how to say, I like blank. And then there was word and phrase matching. So the student was able to associate a phrase with a photo. And yes, we did see that the tasks got more difficult throughout the video. So written support was gradually removed and there was less scaffolding. So on the first section, there was written support so that the student could remember, okay, I'm going to use this vocab word for this hobby. But then at the end, the student had to do all of that without any writing, just from memory. So that's a great way for students to learn and use the language. Teacher provides variety and repetition by giving slightly different tasks that work with the same vocabulary. So again, repetition is going to be very important for beginner level students, but it doesn't have to be boring. As instructors, we can come up with different activity types that use the same vocab, or maybe we just switch up the pictures that we're using and we do the task, and then it helps students to actually do something, to produce and give output in the target language, and it keeps them engaged while not being boring. Lastly, I hope you noticed that the student speaking time got higher toward the end and the teacher speaking time got lower. So gradually removing teacher support, both in written scaffolding and other types of task support, that is important, and the teacher talking less is also important. So this is where allowing for silence could be extra meaningful and helpful as the student processes through what needs to be said. In some cases, it is appropriate to use English in the classroom. And remember, we're aiming for about 10% of English in the class, while 90% is target language time. So this is 10% of the class time. And if the student is frustrated or upset with what's going on, really getting down on themselves because they don't understand, that may be a time when it is appropriate to use English. Another time could be if you think a student has not understood something or has misunderstood something that's being said, then it might be appropriate to step in and clarify in English. Another time it may be appropriate to use English is in giving instructions for complicated tasks. So not all tasks are considered complicated, and one trick that might be helpful is putting task instructions in English on the board or on the PowerPoint, and then using the target language to explain the task. So you're staying in the target language for the explanation and thereby giving students exposure to the target language terms for giving instructions, but they have that scaffold of the visual English in their native language. So you could point to words, etc. But if the task is complicated, then sure, no problem, use English, because then you're able to get more efficiently to the task at hand. Lastly, for setting goals or giving feedback, especially for beginner level learners, to really hear their voice with their goals, and for giving them feedback in a way that they are sure to understand, it is appropriate to use English in those circumstances. Thank you so much for joining this presentation. I hope you have found a few of these tips to be helpful. I encourage you to choose 1 or 2 tips that you can apply in your beginner language classroom this week. Thank you.